Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission Podcast. We are on a mission to encourage and inspire you as you're navigating through this life and with your relationship with Christ. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and today I am joined once again by the handsomest co-host there is, my husband, Mike Toomey.
Wow. Is that me?
It's you. You're
That's
the
me.
one.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. The
Yeah.
love and the intro. This has been a lot of fun doing this with you. I'm really glad that you invited me in.
Thank you for offering. I appreciate it. I know it's a lot. It's a big commitment. And now you get to see what it's like to go through a whole day. And then at the end of the day, we're podcasting.
Here we go. Podcasting coming at you. Coming at you from different rooms in the same house.
That's right. That's right. And as a reminder, this is pre-recorded right now. So Mike and I are actually recording. Today is Easter Sunday. We're matching. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that because when this episode comes out, it's going to be the summer. But that doesn't matter because this topic is relevant every day. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And if you're jumping into this series for the first time, we are in a relationship series and it's focused on growing together and just encouraging you guys in your marriage. So far, we have discussed 5 love languages, the crazy cycle from the book Love and Respect, embracing oneness, learning to love like Christ. Last week, we talked about extending grace. And today, we'll be talking about a big one, and that's practicing forgiveness. I say it's a big one because forgiveness is not easy. That's why I titled this episode Practicing, because I think that it takes a lot of practice to extend forgiveness. I could have called it extending forgiveness, just like extending grace, but I think that it takes more than just extending it. Like it takes work. It's something that we have to continue to practice extending over and over and over and over and over throughout our marriage. And even in all of our relationships, this isn't just about marriage. We have to forgive in every relationship that we're in. Yeah.
I like that you called it practicing forgiveness. And I do think that it's important to practice forgiveness. But I just want to point out for everyone that you don't want to give your spouse too much practice of having to forgive. So let's just put that out there.
Too much practice?
You don't want to give them too many opportunities that they have to practice forgiveness all the time.
They're doing things wrong or you're doing things wrong.
Either way, it should go both ways. You
There
shouldn't be
shouldn't
giving
have to be
people
that much forgiveness, you mean?
there shouldn't be like constant practice that there's like too many things to forgive, that there's just practice going on all the time.
Oh, I don't know, man. Sometimes. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've personally seen the way that unforgiveness shows up in some of the marriages that I have been around. And it's not pretty. I have just observed from the outside that it's caused repeat tension, anger, resentment, hostility. And I think that a lot of people can fall into this misconception that forgiveness means the other person is just let off the hook. And that is really not what forgiveness is about. From a biblical perspective, we are called to forgive. In Ephesians 4:32, it says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God who forgave you." So just like with grace that we just talked about last week, forgiveness is something that we're called to do because God himself has done it for us. He extends his grace. He's forgiven us. So for us to not extend forgiveness or not forgive somebody is really, pretty hypocritical, right?
It definitely is. It's in the Lord's Prayer too.
Yeah.
Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. We are definitely called to forgive. And it reminds me of that story. I'm not prepared with the quote. I didn't realize that I would even think of this, but it just reminded me of that story where someone is forgiven their debts, and it's like this huge debt, and then that servant goes out and someone owes him like a small debt, and he beats the man, and he's like berating this man, and the person who just forgave him saw it and was like, how could you do this, that I just forgave you for something so big, and then
Hmm.
you go and treat someone else in this way?
Hmm.
And that's definitely not the way that we want to be, that we've been forgiven, and we're called to forgive others.
I think that was in Matthew, maybe that
I'm sure it
went
was. It's definitely
that we
it's
went
definitely in
through
the gospel.
recently. Yeah, it was I think it was a parable that was in Matthew. But that's a great correlation and a great point. It's like God forgave us, but we're going to harbor resentment against other people or against our spouse, which is even worse because we live together. You really, I mean, it's just me speaking out loud, but I would want to have the best relationship that I could possibly have with the person that I sleep next to every night or live in the same house with, and not live in a constant state of tension. But that's just me.
I'd say.
So we're called to forgive many times in the Bible. I have a couple of verses to share. In Mark 11:25, it says, "And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses." So forgive other people so that the Lord will forgive you. Matthew 6:15, "But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." Matthew 18:21 through 22, "Then Peter came up to him and said, 'Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times?' Jesus said to him, 'I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. So that's a lot of times. Luke 6:37, "Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven." But before we keep going, I do want to talk a little bit about defining what forgiveness really is, defining what it means, the word forgiveness. Psychologists generally define forgiveness as a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or a group who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness. That source is in the show notes for anybody that's curious. So really, forgiveness goes side by side with grace in that sense. I think it's important for us to talk about what forgiveness is not, though. Just like we talked about what grace is not in our re-engaged marriage class, they did a really good job of addressing what forgiveness is not. So I'm actually going to name off what we learned, which was forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not reconciling. Forgiveness is not condoning. Forgiveness is not a feeling. So this is interesting because it goes against what psychologists say. We'll circle back on this, but they say it's not a feeling, meaning it is a conscious choice, a decision that you make in spite of how you feel. And it's not just about the person who hurt you. It's really more about us. It's about me as a person more than it is about the other person. It's about us not being the ones to hold on to resentment, whether we've received an apology or not. So let's circle back to that. Psychologists say it's a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment. But then we have this kind of conundrum here with it's not a feeling, it's a decision to let go of the feeling, even though it says it's not a feeling. Where do I go with this?
Well, I think really the way that I reconcile that in my own head is that forgiveness is the release of the negative feeling
Mm-hmm.
that you had.
Mm-hmm.
It's deciding that I'm not going to feel that way anymore, whether the person deserves it or not, whether they apologize or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's a release for yourself. It really is a release for yourself. And it reminds me of, when you bottle up negative emotions and you hold things in and don't let them out, or if you hold a grudge for a long time, it really can impact you in more ways than one, and not just spiritual, but also bodily. People start to have health problems and tension and all
Are
kinds of
you
issues.
stealing all of my notes right now, husband?
Not on purpose. I think it's just maybe your notes are on point. These are all the important things.
Oh, thank you. That's a compliment. Yeah, this was actually something that I had for us to kind of talk about a little bit, that I can definitely speak from experience from that perspective, that it takes a lot of energy aside from just the feeling of resentment, but a lot of energy to hold on to the pain, to hold on to the hurt that another person has caused. So much so that I myself have felt physically and mentally taxed by holding on to it. And that releasing it is not only what we're called to do from a biblical perspective, which this is probably why, because God is a genius and he designed our bodies to operate this way. But doing so will physically and mentally benefit our bodies too. Can get pretty hippy dippy on here, but I've read a bit on how toxic thoughts can create toxicity inside of our bodies. So I've read a couple of stories about people who have been either chronically ill or been diagnosed with cancer. And they held on, these folks also were in tandem, holding on to a lot of resentment and unforgiveness. And then they went on to adopt this release of their pain and their anguish and adopt this attitude of forgiveness. And in doing so, they were healed of their chronic illnesses and their cancers without medical intervention. So I think that there is more to be said on this, like you brought up. Forgiveness goes deeper. And I think that we were created and designed by a very wise God who knew this. And it's almost like what's the word? It's almost like a blessing from him that he says, do this thing. And in doing so, we actually end up healing our bodies.
Yeah, it's all true. And I also think about how when you don't forgive or extend grace to someone, most of the time, maybe not all the time, but a lot of the time, the only person that it really impacts is you when
Yeah.
you're holding that grudge.
Yeah.
Because that other
It's
person may
true.
not even know how you feel or that you're still holding on to something.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is on the person who's holding that to let it out.
A lot of times they've long gone forgotten about it, or they've moved
Yeah,
on from it.
they don't even
I'm
know. They don't
I
even
mean, if
know.
it's in a marriage though, usually you kind of know because the other person's still pretty bitter about it.
You may
But
know, but you also may just try to act like it didn't happen and sweep it under the rug and try to never bring it up again and hope that it just goes away.
yeah, hopes that it just disappears, huh?
Hope it just disappears into thin air and maybe one day that person will forget about it.
Sounds a
I've never done
little,
that. I'm not speaking from experience.
yeah, right. This sounds a little bit too legitimate here.
Oh no, that's not for me. I'm just thinking what other people probably do.
Well, to me, this really means that our spiritual awareness and ability to follow the Lord's instructions, benefits us in more ways than just heaven, which, I'm not saying good works will get us into heaven. I'm saying that it's interesting that he's commanding us to extend grace and forgiveness, and just kind of reiterating that when we don't, our bodies hold on to sickness and disease. And when we follow his command to extend grace and forgiveness, our bodies are capable of releasing sickness and disease. It's, you know, um, Carrie Flanagan, who was on the podcast a while back to talk about the sun, she's been talking about this a lot lately. She's actually, now it's in this current time that she's doing this. So it'll be past, but maybe you can go back and listen to it. She's doing a webinar on this topic about how our bodies, we don't need all these medicines and even supplements to heal. It's letting your life be your medicine in a way. It's connecting to the Lord. It's getting out in the sun. It's releasing stress. It's not holding on to tension and hatred and unforgiveness. And it's kind of taking a more holistic approach to healing your life. And I really resonate with a lot of that because I know that I harbor a lot of stress. And there's always so much going on that I'm always so stressed out all the time. And I think that in many ways that can show up in our health, right? It's like you always feel like you're kind of getting sick because you're always going, that type of thing. So anyway, let's get into some dirt. How about that? You want to get into some dirt?
I guess so. I'll buckle up for this one.
Because this is about marriage, forgiveness in marriage, this isn't just about forgiving people in general. You and I have had our fair share of moments that really required forgiveness.
Mm.
And our first few years together were pretty tumultuous
They're
and
pretty rocky.
they were rough. You know, we
No
came from
thanks to
two
me.
different we had two, yeah, thanks to you. No, I'm just kidding, but sort of. Um, they there, we've had waves since then, but one thing that I think the Lord convicted me of very early was just how important it was to forgive and how important forgiveness was going to be in our relationship, because without it, I don't know that we would be where we are today, or at least we both would have been pretty miserable.
I can tell you we would not be where we are today without forgiveness. This is a tough topic for me to speak on because usually I'm the one who needs to be on the receiving end of forgiveness. I'm probably not the most experienced with having to extend forgiveness because my wife is a wonderful, perfect angel and never really does anything wrong. Um, so really, like from my end, I can speak on how important forgiveness is to have a relationship be successful and to be happy and move on with your lives. Because if you didn't extend the grace and forgiveness that you did, there's no way that we would have made it to where we are today. And without even getting into the details, we may or may not, um, depending on how many shovels and pickaxes you brought to dig up the dirt. But I can remember years ago now, but just thinking, man, is this even worth it? Like, if we're just gonna fight all the time and I'm always gonna be in trouble, like this is not the life that I want to live, and I don't want to always be pissing her off, and like this is just not good for either of us. But something made me realize, I had my part in why we were always fighting and why I was always in trouble. It's not like I was getting in trouble for no reason, and that I needed to fix that. And I really hoped that you would be able to truly forgive me and let things go so that we could move on. Because without true forgiveness and for you to really release it and for us to move forward with a clean slate, then we couldn't have really been happy and successful.
Mhm.
And so I'm really grateful that you felt convicted that forgiveness was something you wanted and could do, because we couldn't have been happy. We couldn't have been happy if you were going to harbor all this stuff against me, all your evidence and all the things that I certainly did. But how could we ever make it? We would never be happy if you were just going to hold it all against me for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. People are probably like, what happened? Like, what went
Oh,
on? Well, okay. So I'll make it easy. I'll refer you guys back to our birth story because that was one incident that happened. It was episode 9, I believe. And that was actually just a year ago. So that wasn't
mm,
that long ago. But it was basically Mr. Michael here was looking at pornography. And that was something that was a no in our marriage. That was something that we had both agreed was not going to be a thing. So you guys can go back and listen to what happened in that situation. Now let's pile on that. That was what was going on at the beginning of our relationship, was a lot of looking at pornography and chit chatting it up with a lot of ladies at the same time. And it was a very hard time for me personally in our relationship, but I also knew your heart, and I knew that that wasn't who you were. I knew that you had been sucked in by the enemy, by the world, by the people that were around you who had influenced you in such a way that you were reflecting the culture that you were in. And I knew that it wasn't you because I just felt like I could see the real you, and that that wasn't you because I saw the you that you were with me. And I knew that we had something that was beyond all that garbage, because all that stuff is just distraction. All that stuff is just trash. And it's not to say that it wasn't easy. And I also want to say, I appreciate that you speak about me with this and stuff that went on with the grace, because I was not very graceful many of the times that we had conversations. I think I was speaking from hurt and pain most of the times when I would bring it up. And it was hard for me to like know how to talk to you about it, because how do you say to somebody like what you're doing is wrong and have them actually listen to you? Not an easy it's not an easy thing, but you were willing to have the hard conversations for the most part. There was some withdrawal, there was some running away, but for the most part, you also didn't want to be living that life anymore. And I think that it was like we met at the right time. We came together at the right time, that we both were able to work on ourselves. Like I had to work on forgiveness and grace, and you had to work on sin and getting right. So it was kind of this simultaneous, like we were both sharpening each other in that time of our relationship.
Yeah, it's true. I'll go back and say, I don't know how you saw my heart was not that, because it was so deep and buried, and I gave you all the reasons to think that that was my heart. And like, I just don't know how you were able to see through all that. I have no idea. But I'm glad that you did from the beginning, and always did, and never lost sight of that. Like, you truly never lost sight of that, which I think is really amazing. And I love you for it. I also gave you no reason to show me any grace. Like you're saying, there was a lot of times you didn't show me a lot of grace. I gave you no reason. Um, it's funny. We had a great podcast for last week and talked about grace and how grace is so important and unconditional love and everything is built on that. But like that all kind of goes out the window when somebody's doing you wrong,
Which
and
is why I had that
you
reaction,
know
right? When we read the book and I was like,
exactly.
what is this trash?
Exactly. But, there's a certain amount of, yeah, it does go out the window for a time, and it really depends on how this person reacts and responds in the situation. Cuz some of the time you would confront me about things and I'd be like, "Oh, like I don't want to talk about it. Like just forget this. I'm not." And that wasn't, if that was the way that I would continue to respond, and that I would never acknowledge things that I was doing wrong, or would try to defend myself and continue to do, like, then that's clearly, there's only so much great, you're going to run out of grace on that type of response. But if I turn around and say, wow, you know what, you're right, like maybe I shouldn't be texting all these people and need to burn my boats, and if I'm going to be in a real committed relationship with you, be committed, that I think that was how you were able to get past and extend the grace and forgiveness that I needed, and that we needed to have a successful relationship.
Mhm.
Because if I just wanted to keep on doing what I was going to do, there was no way that it would ever work,
No, I
so
mean,
it really depends on how the person responds.
that's true. I guess, yeah. I mean, I just never thought, I didn't think about the alternative, right? Like, I loved you unconditionally and I loved you in spite of all those things in any way. And I wasn't thinking, what if he doesn't stop doing these things? I was just so focused on getting through it, if we could get through it. And it's to respond to what you said about how I could see your heart. It was because I knew you even before I really knew you, because I think that it takes years to learn someone, years. I mean, we're still learning each other today, and we've been together. It'll be 10 years this year that we've been together, 5 years married. So it takes time to get to know a person. But for me, the more I learned your backstory and the more I learned how things went for you, the more I understood your damage. I understood your trauma. I understood the things that made you do what you were doing, the actions you were taking and why you were taking those actions. And I knew at the end of the day that what you really wanted was to be loved. And you wanted to be loved unconditionally by one person. And I knew that I could be the one to be that person because I did love you unconditionally, and I do. And so that's what I mean is it was like I was fighting for that for you. I was fighting to be the person to show you that I love you no matter what. Even in the turmoil, even though what your actions were, what you were showing was painful. And this is something that I really want to address with women right now. And maybe this will be for men too, but I can only speak as a woman because I am a woman. When your husband, or maybe you're not married yet, maybe it's your fiance, does really dumb things or sinful things, like looks at pornography or is chatting up other women in the beginning of your relationship, you need to understand that this is not about you. This is not your fault, and you are not the reason that these things are happening. These things are happening because the other person is being pulled and drawn into sin. And until the other person pulls themselves out of that sin and makes the conscious choice to do that, that's when things are going to change. I have seen so many women who have been in scenarios where fiance, boyfriend, husband is doing these types of things or looking at pornography. And the woman thinks it's me. Like I'm too ugly or too fat and I need to change my clothes and change my hair, change my body or do these things so that he'll want to stay. And sister, there ain't nothing you can do to your body that's going to make a man stay. If he is being pulled by the enemy into that pit, you could be a supermodel and he's still going to be pulled into that pit because it's not about you. It's about him and it's about what he's going through. So I guess, yeah, you could say this vice versa too, right? For women about men, that, when we're sinning and it's hurtful to our spouse or fiance or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, it's not about them. It's about us. It's about the person that is committing that sin. And it took me a while to get over that, because in the beginning it was a challenging thing for me to feel like I wasn't an influence in that. But when I finally it clicked for me one day, this isn't about me. He's got spiritual warfare stuff going on right now. This is his demon. These are his demons, whatever it might, however you want to say it. These are his his sins that he needs to reconcile and face, they're not because of me. That was where there was true freedom. But it's just kind of, I've had to step back and not focus on myself, I guess is the point.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you put it there and that way, because I notice really only now, like a lot of these problems we resolved a long time ago, but only now and recently have I realized that my ultimate problem was selfishness. Is that I was only worried about myself. And I didn't really care who I was hurting, whether that was someone else or myself. I just cared about myself, and I cared about pleasure and having fun and partying, and like it was a selfish, worldly way to live. And I think a lot of it came from a sick culture and society that we live in today, that people just kind of get together and like everybody's kind of just fooling around with each other. And I'm not saying that everyone does that,
Really.
but
Everybody's
but
just
where I but where I was from, being in New York, I don't know if it's that place or just the circles that I was running around in, but like people definitely, it was not a courting and like let's see if we're going to get married culture. It
yeah.
was
Mike was
everybody
not in
was
the
fooling around.
he wasn't in the homeschool community. You can
I was
sure say
certainly
that.
not in the homeschool community. We can just say that very easily. And I think that's really where a lot of this came from, is that this was just what everyone was doing, and I didn't know anything else. I didn't know anything. I didn't know better. And lucky for me, this sweet little Southern Belle homeschool girl came along, and she got me on the right tracks. I really consciously made a decision to love her and to put my past aside and to like stop doing all the things that I had done for so long, because I found this wonderful woman who was going to treat me right. And the only thing that she wanted from me was that I treated her the way that she was going to treat me. And I had never met a woman like that, that was really going to love me for me and love me all the way and put me first, and that there was no one else, there was nothing else, that nothing would get between us. And the only fights that we had was if I wasn't treating her the same way that she treated me. And I realized that this person, you, Rebecca, my love, were the person who would be the most valuable thing that I could ever have. Is that if I could only do for you what you were willing to do for me, is that we would have the most amazing relationship in the world. And that's when everything changed.
Yeah, I'd say so. You definitely have grown a lot, and that's something that I really admire about you as a person, is that you were willing to change and that you were willing to grow and you were willing to see where you had been wrong and where you had been down the wrong path and say, like, I don't want to keep going down this path, because a lot of people don't make that choice. A lot of people say, no, I'm just going to keep doing whatever I'm doing. And if this person can't accept it, then too bad. I am who I am.
I am
Huh?
who I am. There's a million fish in the sea, and if you don't treat me right, there'll be somebody else. And like that's all, again, all goes back to culture and all
Yeah.
goes back to selfishness. Like how could I expect, like I'm going to text all these people, and it's like, okay, you're pissed off about it. It's like, yeah, because you shouldn't be doing that and you're not doing that to me. But I didn't know anyone like that. Like anyone that I met, is just chatting up with everybody. And like, thank God I've never been on Instagram, but like, people sliding into DMs all day long. Like, that they even, it's so pervasive.
Mhm.
It's in on TV, that people, I wouldn't even know what that means, sliding into DMs, if I didn't see it on 90 Day Fiance. And like, it's just that's what people are used to. And if
Mhm.
that's the life you're going to live, then how could you expect to be in a solid relationship that's committed to one person if you're like going to entertain anything else?
Mhm.
Like, there's nothing more beautiful than having true commitment.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely been a long and interesting journey, and it is interesting to see. And I mentioned this earlier, that me understanding your background was what helped me to understand you and to forgive and to move on, because I can't blame you and harbor things against you for being raised a certain way and for being in certain circles, and you didn't know another way. Like you said, it's not like you grew up in Amish town, Amish community, or a Mormon community, or a homeschool Christian community.
Certainly not. Quite the
When
opposite.
when I share stories with Mike about how I grew up, he's like, "What? What are you talking
It's
about?"
mind-boggling to me, but I love it. It makes me love you even more, and I cherish you because of all these things, and how you used to dress up in these big dresses that your mom would sew, and have tea parties, and go to homeschool, and go on church trips to Tijuana and all kinds of stuff.
We didn't go to
That's
Tijuana.
not
We
a
went to
life that I
Guadalajara.
Guadalajara, okay. But you see what I mean? It's
Yeah.
it's not something I was that I ever knew, and I cherish you for it.
Well, thank you. And listen, it's not to say that I'm perfect either. I got pulled into the world quite a bit myself, when I went to college and stuff like that. So it's not like I'm, this like perfect, sheltered Amish person.
It's just compared to me, I make her look really good.
There you go. But comparatively, a lot less
Comparatively
dirt.
speaking,
Different dirt, right? Different dirt.
different
Um,
dirt for sure. Different
it's
dirt.
just a different a different way of uh history transpiring. But what's cool about forgiveness, you guys, is that we can laugh about it. Like Mike
Yeah.
and I laugh about the things from the past now, where I mean, we weren't laughing about it when we were going through it, that's for sure.
No, no, we weren't.
And even when we did reengage, when forgiveness came up, I had a really hard time with it because it
Mm.
was like bringing back the wounds from last year. And maybe hadn't completely, I'd forgiven you, but I hadn't completely healed from those. And there's still a lot of fear for me surrounding that. And I know that that's something that's not good to harbor, and that the Lord is calling me to release. So I have to practice that. But we can laugh about it now. Just today, I'm going to tell this story because it's kind of funny.
Oh, it's perfect. I was thinking the same thing. I didn't know how to work it in.
Just today, we're on the phone with Mike's parents on FaceTime. Mike is on FaceTime with his parents, with our kids, and I'm sitting next to him.
Our children.
Our two young children.
Mm.
And his dad is telling us that him and his mom went to lunch at this place. And I think they changed the name or something. He was like, "Oh yeah, Mike, we went there for your graduation party. Remember the place where we went where there were those girls that you liked? There was those two girls that you liked." And Mike is like, "Dad." like,
Dad,
I don't know.
Dad, come on.
What'd you say? I don't know what you're talking about. Move on or something.
I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Just go ahead, tell the story. And he's like, no, no, you remember, right? You remember those two girls. Remember that girl? What was her name? And I'm like, Dad, I'm sitting here with my wife of 5 years. We've been together for 10. You're talking about my eighth grade graduation Literally, I was 12. This is 18 years ago. This is a full lifetime ago. And you're talking about this girl. Like, come on, man. And this is not the first time. This is like Rebecca's used to this at this point. My mom used to have a picture of my one of my exes, and she like had it on her desk, had
Yeah.
it on display, like,
Yeah.
and
She
would
did.
like try to show albums of me going on dates with people, and it's like, mom, this is completely inappropriate.
Oh my gosh, that reminds me of this past Thanksgiving. Remember when she posted that picture on Facebook of you making out with your ex?
No, I didn't know that that's what was happening, but I feel like it was like a prom picture or something.
You guys were kissing. I
Equally
mean,
inappropriate.
obviously you were making out because, you know,
It's just totally inappropriate. This is so many years ago, and like my life has moved on. Her life has moved on. All of us have moved on with our lives. Like, you're just living in the past, man. Living in the past. We don't need to
totally.
be
But
digging up those skeletons.
we can laugh about it today. If this had been 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I would have been up the wall about it. But now it's like, it's kind of funny in a way. It's kind of funny because it's like, why are you talking about this?
It's
Like,
only funny now. I really
yeah.
to really try to give a message here and something that's useful. Um, I think the only reason why we can laugh about it now is because I showed Rebecca how sorry I was for all my mistakes that I have ever made. And I'm still apologizing, and I'm always apologizing. And I make it very clear to lay it on really super thick and to butter her up and make sure she knows that I'm super duper sorry. And if I didn't do that, it wouldn't be as easy to forgive me and to move on. If I was always like, "Oh, just wouldn't you just let that go eventually?" Like,
It's a good
that's not
point.
the right attitude. You have to really be sorry. And I am sorry. I do feel bad, and I do want to fix things, and I do wish that I didn't make mistakes, and I wish that I could make the past go away and erase everything, but I can't. And so what I can do is be really super sorry and make sure that you know how much I love you and only you, and you are my past, present, future, and everything. There's
Thank you.
there that's the most important thing.
That's a very good point and good coaching for those listening that, if you're the offender, it does help. It is helpful because he's right. If he was very passive about these kinds of things and was like, "Oh, whatever. It's my past," you know, but he has a good approach and a good attitude about it too. And when this happened, he's just like, he shuts his dad down. He doesn't engage in it. If he
I
were to
made that
engage in
mistake
it, I think
already. I learned from that.
I
I would
don't think
go, "Oh
that
yeah," like in the past we things have come up and I'd go, "Oh yeah." But now I'm just like, I won't even get involved with that. Like, yeah, yeah, move on with the story. Like, get over this. But sometimes you gotta lay it on super thick and be sorry and get her flowers and do nice things. You gotta be really sorry sometimes, and it makes things better. But you gotta mean it too. You gotta really mean it too. I mean it. When I'm
Well,
sorry, I mean it.
that brings us to the last thing that I wanted us to talk about, which is, what does forgiveness look and sound like? And so you're giving some good tips here that it sounds like, I'm sorry, I screwed up, I messed up, doing some nice things, just admitting that you were wrong as the offender helps. But I think it's important to talk about it, since it's important for us to be focusing on the circle. We need to remember that the circle includes not just forgiving the other person, but also asking for forgiveness, which is what Mike is talking about. When we've wronged someone, we've wronged our spouse, we need to ask them for forgiveness. So if we're the one that is making all these offenses, we need to ask them to forgive us. So if it's me, maybe I gave you attitude or spoke unkindly. going to you and saying, I'd like to apologize for snapping at you earlier. That wasn't right. Will you forgive me? This can go a long way. And it's important with this example. This was actually something that happened like yesterday or the day before, where you were crabby and snappy. And then you came to me and you're like, listen, I'm really sorry that I snapped at you today. I just was in a bad mood. And I immediately was like, I forgive you. I forgive you because I am human too. And I do that way more than you do. So, what about the other side of this? Us forgiving someone, it means that we extend forgiveness when we're asked to forgive. When someone asks us to forgive them, when our spouse comes to us and says, I screwed up, will you forgive me? It's us saying, yes, I forgive you. It also means forgiving them even when they don't ask for it. This one is tough, but that's what grace is all about. So in many ways, there have been times where I've forgiven you and you hadn't asked for forgiveness yet. It took years before you really got into the I'm sorry's. And we wouldn't have gotten through all those years if I didn't just forgive you, even in spite of you not being sorry. Because there was a many years where you weren't sorry for some of the stuff that went on, where you're just like, well, you shouldn't have found out about this.
None of this would have happened if you didn't know about it.
Yeah. None
I
of this
disagree
would.
though. I think I was sorry. I'm gonna definitely grant you if that's how your take is, then that's fine. I accept it. But I think I was sorry. You made me real sorry. You definitely made me sorry from the beginning. You made me sorry, honey. Don't you worry about that. I was sorry
Well,
enough.
I don't want to give too many specific of examples, but I can think of a particular instance. Man, this is like really digging in my brain of stuff that I don't dig up, where you are still communicating with an ex and I disagreed that you should be communicating with them. And it hurt me, but I had to just forgive you anyway. And you were not sorry for that until later, maybe. Honestly, I think it took you finally like getting it that, man, this isn't right. You know, if this was reflected back at me, if I had done the same thing, you would have been really hurt.
Mm.
And I think it took you putting yourself in my shoes to go, wait a second, like this is messed up. So for anybody listening, don't talk to your exes. Okay.
Don't talk to
Just
your exes. Put it
save your
past in the
marriage.
past. Yeah, and for any guys that might be listening, those hooks that you just try to keep people on the hook for as long as you can and just see if it's going to work out or if something will happen. Cut the line, man. Cut the line. You
Yeah.
don't need it. When you find somebody who really loves you and who you really love, that's what you want. You want to be dedicated. You want to have somebody who truly loves you. You don't want to have, oh, maybe something will happen with this. Like, you don't need to be liking people's photos just to see if they like you back and put things on the side and
No
just
loose
get
ends.
no loose ends. You got to burn the boats. Burn the boats.
And I do want to say too, if for whatever reason there is an amicable ex relationship, be honest and open with your spouse about it.
Nah, get rid of that too. Get rid of
Well,
that
I'm
too.
saying you get rid of it,
None
but
of
if
that.
if it does exist, make sure your spouse knows about it.
Nah, just cut it off.
Well, this has been fun. Next week, we're going to talk about communication and conflict and how to communicate with each other, spouses, not with your exes. So go cut those off.
Cut. Yeah. So I mentioned burn the boats. I don't think we've talked about what that means to
No,
burn the
share it.
boats.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just really quick story that this really was a big change, a tectonic shift in our relationship and in our marriage. I don't remember when we first came across it, but I do
Pre-marriage
really
class.
take I put a lot of stock in this. I think it's really important. So there's this story about like a Greek general type of thing where it's like Sparta versus many people, and they're going into battle, and they land on a shore, and the army general burns the boats that they came on because there's only 1,000 of them and there's 10,000 of the other army, and he burns the boats because he wanted his men to know that there was no going back. They couldn't retreat. There was no other way, that they needed to stand and fight, and they won the war. And it's the same thing in your relationship. When you have those hooks hanging on for exes or your past, or anything else besides the person that you really should love and be committed to, you haven't burned your boats. You need to really burn your boats and know that there's no going back. There's no way out. When you're, especially once you're already married, there should be no backup plan. There should be no, if this doesn't work out, plan. There should be no ejector seat or cut the parachute. Like, you can't be thinking like that. You got to burn your boats and know, like, you're in this forever. You're in this, and you need to find a way to make it work. And that's what a marriage is all about.
That's right. As Mike says, there's only one way out of this marriage, and it's in a
It's in
box.
a box.
Such an Italian thing to say.
Only one way out.
It's in
It's
a
in a box.
box.
It's in a box.
It's in a box, honey.
That is a very like mafia thing to say, isn't it?
Yep. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this chat on forgiveness. Go forgive somebody today. It'll help you. It'll make you feel better, and it's what we're called to do. So again, we're going to talk about communication conflict next week, so be sure to tune in. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you'd like to follow along outside the podcast, you can join the mission on Facebook and Instagram at The Radiant Mission, or on YouTube. You can find us there too if you're not already watching this on YouTube. And today we are closing with James 5:16. Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. We're wishing you a radiant week, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
This is a fun. Thanks, y'all.